My name is Detective Jameson, and I had been on the trail of a notorious serial killer for months. The media had dubbed him the Midnight Murderer, as he only struck in the late hours of the night. His victims were all young women, and he left behind no clues or evidence, making it almost impossible to catch him. One night, I was out patrolling the streets when I received a call about a possible sighting of the Midnight Murderer. I immediately headed to the location and spotted a figure running down the alley. I gave chase, but as I got closer, I realized that something was not quite right. The figure seemed to be floating above the ground, and I could hear strange whispers in my ear. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on the chase. As I rounded the corner, the figure disappeared right in front of my eyes. I stood there, stunned, not sure what had just happened. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and continued my search for the killer. Days turned into weeks, and I had still not been able to catch the Midnight Murderer. I was on the verge of giving up when I received a call from an anonymous tipster. They claimed to have information about the killer's whereabouts and urged me to meet them in an abandoned building in the outskirts of the city. I arrived at the location, but the building was eerily quiet. I slowly made my way inside, my hand resting on my gun. The whispers I had heard during the previous chase started again, but this time they were louder, more insistent. As I climbed the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I quickened my pace, and the footsteps followed suit. I finally reached the top floor and entered a room that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The whispers had now turned into a full-blown conversation, but I could not make out what was being said. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the room was plunged into darkness. I tried to turn on my flashlight, but it would not work. I was alone in the dark with the Midnight Murderer. Then I saw him. The killer was standing in front of me, but he was not alone. He was surrounded by shadows that seemed to be alive, moving and shifting around him. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of voices. I aimed my gun at the killer, but the shadows closed in, and I could no longer see him. I fired blindly, but my bullets did not seem to have any effect. The whispers turned into a chorus, and I felt like I was losing my mind. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the corner of the room, and the shadows started to dissipate. The Midnight Murderer was nowhere to be seen, and I was left standing there, alone in the room. As I left the building, I knew that the Midnight Murderer had gotten away again. But this time, I had a feeling that it was not just a man I was dealing with. There was something paranormal at play, and I knew that I would have to be extra vigilant in my pursuit. From that day on, I started to notice strange occurrences happening around me. My radio would sometimes pick up strange frequencies, and I would see shadowy figures in the corner of my eye. But I refused to let it deter me from my mission to catch the Midnight Murderer. I delved deeper into the case, researching everything I could about the killer's victims and his methods. I even consulted with paranormal experts to see if they had any insight into what I was experiencing. One night, as I was driving home from work, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I realized that it was the Midnight Murderer. I slammed on the brakes and got out of my car, aiming my gun at him. But this time, he did not run. Instead, he looked directly at me, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was as if his eyes were peering into my soul, and I could feel the weight of all the lives he had taken. Suddenly, the whispers started again, but this time they were not just in my head. They were coming from the Midnight Murderer himself. He was speaking to me, telling me about all the pain and suffering he had caused, and how it had led him down a path of darkness. I listened, transfixed as he spoke, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The Midnight Murderer was gone, and I was left standing there alone on the dark road. From that moment on, I knew that I had to approach the case from a different angle. It was not just about catching a killer. It was about understanding the forces that drove him to commit such heinous acts. I worked with paranormal experts and psychics, trying to uncover the truth about the Midnight Murderer's motivations. And finally, after months of investigation, we found him. He was holed up in an old warehouse, surrounded by strange symbols and artifacts. We stormed the building and a fierce gunfight ensued, but this time, I was not alone. I had the support of my fellow officers and the paranormal experts who had helped me on this journey. In the end, we were able to take down the Midnight Murderer. But it was not just a victory for justice, it was a victory for understanding. We had unlocked the secrets of the paranormal forces that had driven him to commit his crimes, and we could finally put an end to the nightmare that had plagued our city. As for me, I know that I will never forget the strange and paranormal experiences that I had during this investigation, but I also know that I am stronger for them and that I will continue to seek out the truth no matter where it takes me. I was on patrol duty in the older part of town, where the streets were lined with crumbling, abandoned buildings. The night was cold, and the wind whistled through the empty structures, creating a haunting atmosphere. It was in this eerie setting that I encountered something I'll never forget. As I rounded a corner, my flashlight illuminated a spectral figure standing in the middle of the street. She was a young woman, dressed in tattered clothing, her eyes hollow and filled with sadness. I stood there, frozen in fear, as she seemed to float towards me. Her mouth opened to speak, but no sound came out. In an instant, she disappeared, leaving behind only the chilling memory of her ghostly visage. I later learned that the spot where I encountered her was the site of a tragic murder years ago. Her spirit, it seemed, was still trapped in this world, unable to find peace. Shaken by the experience, I continued my patrol, trying to shake off the sense of dread that had settled over me. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Doors opened and closed on their own, and I heard footsteps and whispers in empty rooms. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew that something was not right. It was then that I received a call from dispatch reporting a disturbance at an old mansion on the outskirts of town. I knew that I had to investigate, even if it meant facing my fears head-on. As I approached the mansion, I could feel a palpable sense of darkness emanating from within. The front door creaked open and I cautiously stepped inside. The air was thick with the musty scent of neglect, and I could hear the faint sound of laughter and music coming from upstairs. I drew my weapon and slowly climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top, I saw a group of people dressed in old-fashioned clothing, dancing and drinking as if they were at a party. But something about them was not quite right. They seemed to flicker and fade, like ghosts in a dream. Then I saw her again, the young woman I had encountered earlier. She was standing in the corner, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Without warning, the room was plunged into darkness, and I could hear the sound of footsteps coming towards me. I turned to run, but I was too late. A cold hand grabbed my arm, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through my body. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground outside the mansion, my heart racing and my mind in a fog. When I returned to the station, I tried to make sense of what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the less clear it became. Had I really encountered a group of ghosts from another time, or was it all just a hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue? I may never know the answer, but one thing is certain. I will never forget the night that I came face to face with the paranormal. As a police officer, I have seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer terror of that unforgettable encounter. I was on a search mission for a missing child who had disappeared from his home the previous night. The child's parents were frantic with worry. and it was my duty as a police officer to find him as quickly as possible. We had searched the surrounding areas, but so far there was no sign of the child. As I walked through the dense forest, I could feel a strange energy around me. It was as if something was watching me, following my every move. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it persisted, growing stronger as I went deeper into the woods. Suddenly, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of a child's laughter, high-pitched and joyous, but somehow sinister at the same time. I ran in the direction of the sound, hoping that it was the missing child, but fearing that it might be something far more sinister. As I burst through the undergrowth, I saw something that made me freeze in terror. There, standing in front of me, was a little boy, but he was not like any child I had ever seen. His skin was pale, his eyes black as coal, and he had a malevolent grin on his face that chilled me to the bone. Before I could react, he vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the forest, confused and frightened. I tried to radio for backup, but my communication device was dead, and I was completely cut off from the rest of the world. As I continued my search, the forest seemed to grow darker and more sinister. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and the leaves rustled ominously in the wind. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, watching my every move. Suddenly, I heard a voice whisper my name. It was faint and barely audible, but it was there, a spectral presence that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I turned to face the direction of the voice, but there was no one there. As I pushed forward, the air grew colder and I could see my breath in front of me. The child's laughter echoed through the forest, taunting me, and I felt as if I was being led into a trap. Then I saw him again, the black-eyed child, standing in the middle of a clearing. He beckoned me forward, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. I took a step towards him, then another, until I was standing right in front of him. He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the child he once was, before he was transformed into this malevolent entity. "I know where the boy is," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "But you have to give me something in return." I knew that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding, but I had no choice. I had to find the missing child no matter what it took. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The child grinned, revealing a row of razor-sharp teeth. "Your soul," he said, and with that, he disappeared into thin air. I was left standing in the clearing, my heart racing with fear and my mind reeling. What had I just done? Was I now forever bound to this malevolent entity, or was there still a chance to break free? As I stumbled through the forest, trying to find my way back to civilization, I could feel a cold, dark presence following me. I knew that I had made a deal with the devil, and I was now forever marked by the paranormal. I was an officer for the local police department for nearly a decade, and one case still haunts me to this day. It happened on a cold October night when the air was thick with fog and the moon seemed to be hiding behind the clouds. I had been assigned to investigate a string of mysterious disappearances in a remote part of town. Locals had dubbed the area Whispering Woods, and many believed it was cursed. I arrived at the scene, a small, dilapidated shack on the edge of the woods. As I approached, I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. The air seemed to grow colder, and a gust of wind rustled through the trees, sending shivers through my body. I shook off the feeling and continued my investigation. Inside the shack, I found evidence of a struggle. The contents of the room were overturned, and there were scratches on the floor and walls. The room was drenched in an eerie silence, punctuated only by the distant howls of wolves in the forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I saw no one. I decided to venture deeper into the woods, following the trail of broken branches and trampled grass that seemed to lead away from the shack. The fog grew denser, and the shadows seemed to dance in the dim light of my flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pressed on, determined to solve the case and bring closure to the families of the missing people. Some distance into the woods, I stumbled upon a clearing. The fog dissipated, revealing an ancient stone well at the center. It was adorned with strange symbols and appeared to be of a different time. As I approached, I noticed the symbols seemed to glow faintly, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. I heard a faint whisper, like the wind itself was speaking to me. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out a single word. Closer. Feeling inexplicably drawn to the well, I stepped forward, my hands reaching out to touch the cold stone. The moment my fingers brushed against the surface, the world around me changed. The trees seemed to come alive, their branches twisting and writhing like snakes. The ground beneath me shook, and the well began to emit an ominous hum. I tried to step back, but my legs refused to move, as if they were rooted to the ground. Suddenly, the well's mouth opened, revealing a darkness so deep it seemed to swallow all light. I felt an unseen force pulling me toward it, and I fought desperately to resist its grasp. The whispers grew louder, drowning out the sound of my own screams as I struggled against the well's pull. In that moment, the spirits of the missing people appeared around me, their faces twisted in terror and despair. They reached out to me, pleading for help, but I could do nothing to save them. The force dragging me toward the well grew stronger, and I knew that I was about to join them in whatever hellish place they now inhabited. Just as I felt my strength fading, a burst of light pierced the darkness. A figure appeared in the clearing, her face obscured by a hood. She raised her hand, and the well's pull ceased. The spirits vanished, and the trees returned to their normal state. The figure approached me, and as she lowered her hood, I saw a face that was both familiar and mysterious. She was an older woman with wise, knowing eyes, and it felt as though I'd known her my entire life. "You've seen a glimpse of the darkness that exists in this world," she said, her voice soft and gentle, "but you must not let it consume you. You have a duty to protect the living, and that is a burden you must bear." With those words, she vanished into the fog, leaving me alone in the clearing. The well closed, sealing the darkness within, and I knew that I had been given a second chance. I returned to the shack and radioed for backup, determined to continue my investigation and find the truth behind the disappearances. The paranormal encounter in Whispering Woods changed me, and I knew that I would never again doubt the existence of things beyond our understanding. In the years that followed, I continued my work as a police officer, always keeping an eye out for the supernatural. And every so often, when I found myself in the darkest corners of the world, I would remember the woman who had saved me and wonder who, or what, she truly was.